Donald Trump shakes up his top campaign staff as Hillary Clinton rises in the polls. Jose Azzano Matsura's conspiracy trial continues, and there are new revelations about illegal campaign contributions. Getting a SENTRI passed across the border is crucial for divided families, but entirely unpredictable. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Michael Smolens, politics editor for the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Michael.
Mark, how are you doing?
Good to have you back today. Investigative reporter Amitha Sharma of KPBS News. Hi, Amitha.
Hi, Mark.
And Fronteras reporter Jean Guerrero, also of KPBS. Hi, Jean.
Hey, Mark.
Welcome back. Well, Donald Trump continues to dominate political discussion in this strange election year. Lately, he's accused President Obama and Hillary Clinton of founding ISIS and disparaged the media for reporting what he says. And now Trump has replaced his campaign chief with a fellow firebrand, encouraging him to unleash the full Donald. What impact are Trump's sinking poll numbers having on him and on down-ballot races and Republican fortunes overall? First, we got a clip of both candidates this week.
I'm asking for the vote of every African-American citizen struggling in our country today who wants a different and much better future.
They can make him read new words from a teleprompter. But he is still the same man who insults Gold Star families, demeans women.
All right, Michael, let's start with the shakeup this week in the Trump campaign. Who's in and who's out?
Well, as you know, Paul Manafort resigned today, on Friday. Of course, he's been in all sorts of trouble, I think, or issues with his relations and the money he's been taking from interests in Ukraine, and that's been an issue. But I think beyond that, there was just a political misfit with him and Donald Trump. Now
Manafort was the experienced guy. He had a lot. He had been through political wars.
He was the manager of the
campaigns.
Convention here in 1996, the Republican Convention. So he's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
He's hired as his CEO. I think that's the term they use. Steve Bannon, who's the firebrand head of the Breitbart news organization, and we know what he's about. He's a very conservative, attack-oriented. A lot of people think he's divisive. And Kellyanne Conway, a longtime Republican pollster who's been involved in campaigns.
All right, so he, as you say, Bannon is kind of known as a political street fighter here. What does this indicate for the 2+ months we have left leading up to the November election?
Well, Mark, it's interesting because Trump continues to confound. We all expected after this, all right, he's going to come out, guns blazing, swinging hard. And Kellyanne Conway said, her goal, even though I think she's a little bit more reined in than Bannon, is to let Donald be Donald, let Trump feel comfortable in his own skin, which is an interesting way of putting it. But in his first speech after this whole shakeup and so forth, it was the most un-Trumpian, moment I've seen him. He gave a very scripted speech. He apologized or said he had regrets for some of the things he said, that sometimes he kind of just says stuff, in the heat of the moment. And he was reaching out in sort of an inclusive way. All the things that we didn't think we'd see under the new Bannon mode. So it's really hard to say where he's going. We're going to see some bare-knuckled stuff from Trump. He's put some tough immigration ads out in key states and in swing states, and we know that that's a huge issue among people. It worked well here for Pete Wilson when he was running for re-election and governor. So we're going to see a lot of that. But like I said, out of the chute, it wasn't. I think the media was all ready for the tough Donald, and it was a little bit soft.
Yeah. Is there a way for him to turn this around?
There's always a way. I mean, let's not forget, his opponent, who has all sorts of experience, but we've talked about the Hillary and the Clinton fatigue, but also she's got her issues. I mean, they realize they've got problems, as Trump did. The Clinton Foundation just announced that they wouldn't be taking foreign donations or donations from foreign interests if she's elected president, which some critics, particularly Republicans, were saying, well, why don't they stop now if this is a potential conflict if she's running for president? I think Bill Clinton suggested he's going to stop taking money for speeches. So they realize that that's an issue there, their relations with foreign companies and foreign countries. And also just, I think Trump has hit a nerve in this whole pay-to-play business about the foundation. and how people might have been able to relate with the State Department when she was Secretary of State.
But as you say, he's really hadn't made a lot of hay with that kind of stuff because he's going after the Gold Star family. He's going after Ted Cruz's father and palling around with Lee Harvey Oswald and this kind of crazy.
Republicans think they have a treasure trove under the normal circumstances of campaign and legitimate, criticism, attacks, whatever you want to call it. But it's been just sort of subsumed or submerged under, Donald stepping on his own foot. So we'll see if they can right that. But it's going to be very difficult. I mean, one of the more telling things, he's been losing ground both nationally and in key states. The Washington Post pointed out that in key states and even nationally, he's losing with white males. I mean, that was his bulwark. I mean, if he can't...
He's right down the middle with them normally.
Again, time is very short, but this is such a volatile race. And like I say, Clinton also is a flawed candidate. So she should be just running away with it, but I think that they're going to have to keep their, foot to the pedal the whole way down.
Now, as we say, a big story right now, New York Times has on the front page again today, his fortunes have really sunk since the Republican National Convention. Got somewhat of a bump out there, was kind of neck and neck in the polls. That's diminished since then. And now the press is really writing about some of these down ballot races here. Is there going to be this Trump effect, and what's going to happen in places like even in California? Let's take Darrell Issa, for example. Normally a veteran GOP congressman. He headed a notorious Benghazi, one of the many hearings into Hillary Clinton. Is he in trouble in this district just north of him?
I don't know if trouble's quite the way to put it. He's certainly got to have concerns. I mean, part of it's a couple things. It's the Trump effect, I think, that the Democratic turnout in the primary and the independent turnout really was interested in the Democratic race. So that was the focus there. And Doug Applegate, his opponent, came out of nowhere and it was only behind by like 6 points in the primary. But Darrell Issa was, he's sort of accustomed to being this big national figure and doesn't have to tend to the local fires or campaigning that much. They really didn't do anything. He's got a ton of money in the bank, and we'll see a lot more of that. The other day, he subbed in as a clerk at a gas station convenience store.
Something you may not have seen in previous campaigns.
Exactly. I would hazard a guess that if he wasn't up in kind of a challenging re-election, he might have been doing something else that morning.
All right.
Darrell Issa is sort of a good illustration of another problem for the Republican Party, and that is the leaders within the party who have clung to him in terms of continuing to support him.
Trump, you mean?
Trump, exactly. So what kind of a tight spot are they in?
Yeah,
if they continue to support him, don't they run the risk of losing legitimacy? Or if they back away from him, don't they run the risk of alienating Trump's core supporters?
Well, you crystallized the problem right there. Republicans are really in the proverbial rock between a rock and a hard place, and they are, as Mark used the term down ballot. They're really wondering whether they should just sort of jettison, at least in terms of resources, to Trump and really focus to try to save certain districts and Senate seats, if not, progressing. I mean, I think they thought they would be coming into this year with a head of steam to even pick up seats, and now they're in danger of losing the Senate, and maybe far off a little bit, but some think that the House could be in play. So they've got a lot of problems, and I think we're just starting to see if Trump continues his ways, more pullback from the Republican hierarchy in terms of his campaign and focusing on the down-ballot races.
Let's talk about a couple other races here, a little closer to home here. We've got the race to replace retiring U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer. What's happening there between those two candidates? Two Democrats.
Yeah, that's sort of the race that has kind of put everybody to sleep. Kamala Harris is in a commanding position. I mean, she was
Attorney General currently.
The Attorney General, yes, and she's running against Loretta Sanchez, a congresswoman who I think surprised some people with, she's got a lot of grit, and people were surprised, I think, initially that she got into the race, but she started showing some pretty good life. But Harris really has the infrastructure. The whole Democratic, party seems to be behind her. The president endorsed her. The vice president, Michael Bloomberg, is going to be out. The independent, the former Republican, raising money for her. So she's kind of been the darling of the party, and the Sanchez has been a little bit on the outside, and I just don't see that changing. The polls, the money, everything seems to be going in her direction.
Sanchez has the Latino vote, right? I mean, she could have a Latino vote if she. And how much is she out there really pounding the pavement?
Oh, she's campaigning hard, but I don't think she quite has the resources. And frankly, this has been a sort of a surprisingly quiet race for an open U.S. Senate seat in California. And it almost seems to be more, remember in the good old days that the summer used to be a little bit of a downtime. And it wasn't like the campaign stopped, but they were doing more, reorganizing for the general election. And then once you hit Labor Day, there's a lot more public stuff. Of course, the presidential campaigns for many cycles has defied that, but it seems to be pretty low key. I'm sure that Sanchez in particular is husbanding her resources for the fall campaign because she doesn't have quite what Harris has. In the primary, Harris actually spent a lot. A lot of people were wondering whether she spent wisely, so there might be an issue there. But it would really take, I think, a real problem to surface for Harris to lose this.
All right, we're out of time on that segment, but we'll obviously keep watching this as we get on toward the election time and see what Mr. Trump says and where he goes from here. Well, sometimes it may seem like it, but San Diego District Attorney Bonnie Dumanis is not on trial in federal court, but one of her major political backers is a Mexican tycoon accused of funneling hundreds of thousands of dollars to candidates in the 2012 campaign for mayor in San Diego, including Dumanis. That's illegal. The high-profile case known as the Azzano trial shifts to the defense phase next week, and San Diego's DA is slated to testify. Amitha, start with who the defendant, remind us what he's charged with and who he is.
So Azzano is a very well-known businessman in Mexico whose family made its money primarily through surveillance and other technology. Mm-hmm. So he
very
is
wealthy.
Very wealthy, and so he's accused, as you said in your intro, of funneling almost $600,000 into San Diego campaigns, primarily the 2012 mayoral race.
Okay, and of course that's illegal because he's not a U.S. citizen.
The law says unless you have a green card, you cannot give in U.S. campaigns. Mm-hmm.
Okay, now he's accused, and there's other defendants here, of trying to boost the fortunes of Bonnie Dumanis, who was running for mayor, and of course Bob Filner, who was eventually elected and then had to resign.
So Azzano is accused of actually creating an independent expenditure committee, a PAC, for Bonnie Dumanis to help her get elected as mayor in 2012, and contributing $100,000 to that PAC. He's also accused of bankrolling another $100,000 in campaign social media services for her campaign, which her campaign never recorded on disclosure forms.
Okay. And what do prosecutors say that Azzano wanted in return?
Well, the prosecution's theory, and they believe that they've proved it in court, is that Azzano wanted to turn San Diego's Bayfront into a Miami West, a local Miami West.
So some big developments here, and to obviously benefit and profit down the road.
Yeah. Five-star hotels,
from these kinds of developments. Okay, now tell us what you discovered happened with the Dumanis campaign on this fateful day, December 29th, 2011. Why is that significant?
Well, what's interesting about this trial, or what's come out in this trial, is in the opening statement, prosecutors said that Azzano was the single largest contributor in the 2012 mayoral election. In fact, they said that 25% of the money that Bonnie Dumanis received in her mayoral effort came from Azzano. So we wanted to know what that looked like. And what it looked like was on a single day, December 29th, 2011, 26 of the 61 donations that she received came from people allegedly financed by Azzano. And some of these people included a grandmother with dementia, a gas station worker, a homemaker, and all of these people contributed the maximum amount.
So these are straw donors, that is, a shadowy financier gives them money and says contribute. And
right. So a straw donor is somebody who takes somebody else's money and gives in their own name.
And that's the allegation in this case.
And that's the allegation. We also found that an additional 14 people connected to tow truck companies who previously been investigated for straw giving also gave on that same day. So, you can get differing opinions on this.
And you talked to some political or legal experts on straw donors and what they mean.
So the legal opinion is split on this. Mm-hmm. Some people will say, look, campaigns are busy places, and they simply do not have the staff to go through and vet every single contributor. Other people will say, look, the legal onus is on the donor to not violate federal election law and give if you can't. But the onus is also on the recipient, and that is that you've got to do due diligence. If you see some unusual patterns of giving, you have to take a closer look. And Bonnie Dumanis herself gave an interview, I believe in 2014, to former San Diego Mayor Roger Hedgecock, during which she said that my campaign team is a stickler for the rules, and they make sure that they're extremely careful and that they don't cross any lines.
Mm-hmm. So why, what is it, first of all, what's Azzano's basic defense in this case? What's his attorneys going to argue?
Well, I spoke with one of his defense attorneys earlier this week, and he said, campaign finance laws are extremely confusing. Can you explain them? Can you explain them? I mean, does anyone know what Citizen United is about? So how can you expect somebody who really hasn't spent a lot of time in this country to know what the campaign finance laws are? But the other part of this is they want to basically point the blame at Ernie Encinas, who was allegedly a liaison between Azzano and the candidates who allegedly received Azzano's money.
And he's pleaded out in this case.
He has pleaded out. He's pleaded guilty to tax fraud and conspiracy charges. He was on the prosecution's list to take the stand, the witness list. He, however, was not called to the stand.
Now, as we said at the outset, the prosecution's phase is over now. We're going to shift into the defense phase.
It's not quite over. There's probably a little bit of testimony that's going to take place on Tuesday, and then the defense will
So the bulk of it.
open.
But they haven't called the district attorney in their part, which you would think if they're saying, hey, they made this illegal contribution, you'd bring the person in who got the contribution to kind of prove that up, and they didn't call.
Well, I think from their perspective, the district attorney is not on trial here. Okay. It is interesting, though, they've actually put on emails as evidence from Bonnie Dumanis, where she says that she's just been on a conference call with Azzano and some other people, and she's very excitedly talking about a social media services sort of guru, a master of internet campaign stuff, who Mr. A, as she refers to Azzano, wants her to meet. And it should be pointed out that Bonnie Dumanis met at least twice with Azzano that we know of. She had this conference call with him, and she wrote a letter of recommendation for his son to USD. There's also a second letter from Bonnie Dumanis, but we do not know what the contents say.
So what's her posture in all of this? What does she say happened? That she simply didn't know the law, didn't know he was not a U.S. resident or citizen?
Well, when the case was first unsealed, she said she was outraged and she was angry by what's being alleged, and that this was the first that she had heard of it. She has been asked about her contact with Azzano, and she's changed her story a couple of times. She first said that she didn't really remember him, but she met him once, and then we have found out that the contact was a little bit deeper than that.
Now, Michael, I do want to be a little time left on this segment. She really won in the court of public opinion because she got reelected while a lot of the high points of these allegations we're talking about were already out there, right?
Well, actually, a lot of them weren't, or just were out. I mean, one of the key ones that Amitha mentioned, that she wrote a letter of recommendation for Azzano's son to the University of San Diego. And there was a court case by her opponent, trying to get that letter, public, like the day before the election or shortly before the election. And the judge just didn't want to get involved. He thought it was, political and so forth. So, as Mitha said, that whether this comes out in court or not, that Dumanis has been very, very limited in what she's talked about. And as we've learned almost drip by drip through court documents, that her relationship with Azzano was much deeper than she has publicly talked about. Now, will that come up in trial? I mean, does anybody really want to implicate her? Because is that in anybody's interest?
It doesn't.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's in anybody's interest. Yeah. You would ask why the prosecution hadn't put her on the stand. Right. Well, she's a bit of a liability, because once she goes on that stand and the prosecution either asks her, did you know that Mr. Azzano, did you think that he had a green card? If you thought he had a green card, does that mean that you asked him? And if you asked him, what did he say? And if you didn't ask him, why didn't you ask him?
Big can of worms there.
So that's a bit of a problem. If she goes on the stand, which the defense says she will take the stand next week, and nobody ever asks her that question about what she knew of Azzano's legal status, that's also a problem. I mean, the jury may say, well, look, the government has proven its case, and that was, did Azzano or not, did he knowingly give, did he funnel the money to these candidates? If that's all they're looking at, fine. But if there are questions within the jury's mind that, hey, look, you know what? They're going after this guy. He's the donor, but what about the candidates? And what about these emails? And wow, she's on the stand and nobody asked her whether she knew. Yeah, the jury might not like that.
Could be a big problem. Well, we'll certainly watch next week as this continues to unfold in federal court. All right, we're going to move on. Our border crossing with Mexico is the world's busiest, and even with a major recent overhaul, it can take hours to cross back into the U.S. That's why SENTRI was created. It's an expedited system for frequent border crossers willing to undergo extensive background checks. But some people whose lives straddle the border are being denied the chance to gain SENTRI status. Eugene, start with the SENTRI program. It's an acronym. What does that stand for?
Yeah, it's kind of a clunky name. It's the Secure Electronic Network for Travelers Rapid Inspection.
But it gives us SENTRI. We love SENTRI.
Exactly. That's why everybody just calls it SENTRI. It lets you cross much faster. Basically, you give U.S. Customs and Border Protection permission through a $100 or so application to do a thorough background check on you. And then after they do that, they can invite you in for an interview and make the final decision on whether or not you qualify.
And it can save hours, which for any number of people, for any of us obviously, but well, we're going to get into the specifics here. Your story was about women specifically who were barred from the SENTRI program. You know, they've got the money, they're willing to do the background check, they cross all the T's, fill out all the forms. Who are they and why can't they get the pass?
So these are U.S. citizen women whose husbands were deported to Mexico. And they moved to Mexico in most cases to keep their families together. In many cases, they're the primary breadwinners of their families, so they are still having to cross the border to either work in the United States, or many of them make the decision to send their children to schools in the United States. But they want to live in Mexico because they want to keep their families together.
Okay, so as I say, they're straddling the border here. Now, we do have a clip here we want to play from your story. It features Alicia, am I pronouncing that, Lopez, who lives in Tijuana with her husband and kids, but she works in the U.S. Let's hear her take on it.
Lopez also applied for the SENTRI Trusted Traveler program. The border agent told her she would never qualify because she was married to a deported man at the time.
Thank you. I have no criminal record. I have nothing on my driving record. I have nothing. I mean, a good employment history, everything.
So what does the government say about why folks such as her are being denied this pass?
So they're deemed high risk. They're told during their in-person interviews that because they're married to a deported person, that they are at high risk of human smuggling. So they're denied the pass. There's no policy within Customs and Border Protection to deny spouses of deported Mexicans SENTRI, but it does appear to be a practice. If you look at the guidelines, there's very specific reasons for which you might be denied SENTRI. For example, if you've been convicted of a crime, or if you're the subject of a law enforcement agency investigation. And those are very specific reasons. But then there's a very last one that's sort of a vague reason, and it's if you cannot satisfy Customs and Border Protection of your low-risk status or meet other program requirements. And that appears to be determined during the in-person interview, and that's what seems to be preventing these women from getting.
Michael?
Gene, well, just on the spouse that's been deported. Now, they've been deported not because necessarily they were unauthorized immigrants, but they did something else, usually in some sort of conviction or crime. Is that the case? And I guess what I'm getting at here is that sort of a standard? If I had a spouse who was not a national and somehow, got in trouble with the law, I mean, is that just sort of the standard practice because it's more the criminal background and my tie to them than the individual myself who might have a clean record?
That's true. That is definitely a practice as well. If you have a close tie to a criminal, you may be denied SENTRI.
My spouse, yeah.
Because for the same reason that you are not considered low risk. However, a lot of these women were angry because their husbands didn't necessarily commit crimes. I spoke to one woman whose husband was deported. He crossed back into Mexico to visit a relative and was trying to cross back. And Minutemen stopped him at the border and sent him back to Mexico. But he'd never been convicted of any criminal.
It was strictly immigration status.
Crossing the border. so to speak. Yeah.
Walk us through a typical day for the border crossers who could really benefit from this SENTRI pass. What's it like waiting for hours in line with kids? You did some interviews along that line.
Yeah, I spoke to one woman who often finds herself having to pull over to the side because her children just get so frustrated with the way that they'll start crying. She'll need to change a diaper or breastfeed her infant. So for those women who have to travel with children, it seems to be a very particular nightmare.
And this really changes their lives because it depends on what jobs they're going to do, careers they may pursue, where they're going to live, how separated they're going to be during the week or on weekends. I mean, it's a real impact on the life.
Yeah,
of
completely.
These folks.
Yeah, and I mean, if you work every day, which Alicia Lopez, who we heard earlier, she does her makeup in the car because she's trying to save time, and she has so much time where she's at a complete standstill.
Just sitting there. All right, a few seconds left. Is there any appeal of a denial in this process for a SENTRI pass?
So there is an option to appeal these decisions. I haven't heard of any successful appeals. It can take months to get a response. In many cases, the women simply reapply, but it's such an expensive process that most of them decide not to.
Not an option. Okay, very good story. Thank you very much. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Michael Smolens of the San Diego Union Tribune, Amitha Sharma of KPBS News, and Jean Guerrero, also of KPBS. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.